Hello wonderful person, this is Anton, and today we're going to discuss a somewhat bizarre topic of chins. And we cannot talk about chins without a picture of Jay Leno, whose chin is so famous it should actually have its own talk show. But on a more serious note, we're actually going to be discussing a somewhat exciting biological study that focuses on this somewhat bizarre jawline structure that pretty much all humans seem to contain. And so this somewhat unusual bony bit that we all seem to have on the bottom of our jaws, and something that most of us think is kind of mundane and is not particularly exciting, in the world of biology is extremely weird and is actually a massive biological mystery. Because as it turns out, right here, or I guess in that picture of Jay Leno, you're looking at the only bone in the entire human body that is completely unique to human species. And not even our closest living relatives, such as chimps or gorillas, seem to have one. As a matter of fact, even the extinct cousins of ours, the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, seem to have something entirely different, involving a kind of a sloping jaw without this particular projection, which is technically pretty funny. First of all, this actually answers the question of what it is to be a human. In this case, it's right here. And second of all, it I guess makes Jay Leno the most human of us all. Okay, I'm gonna stop with the Jay Leno jokes. But really the question here is, why do we even have it? And what does this tell about human evolution? And so today, we're going to focus on this study that's literally all about the human chin and why we seem to have it. But we're also going to briefly discuss some other organs and certain other body parts that makes us truly unique compared to every other animal. Or essentially we're going to discuss the unique biology of a human body. But I guess let's start with this study first, because this is actually kind of exciting, even though the overall conclusion is kind of mundane. And that's because here, for a very long time, scientists always thought that the chin must have some kind of a purpose. As a matter of fact, there's been quite a few different propositions and quite a few different explanations to try to explain this somewhat unique feature. For example, maybe this was some kind of a protection or some kind of a support to help our jaws handle the stress of chewing, possibly as a result of the evolving human diet as we slowly became more agricultural. But other propositions even went further. Maybe this right here was the physical demand for the human speech. As a matter of fact, since humans are the only speaking animals, or at least animals that speak with extremely advanced vocabulary, maybe it was all right here. Or maybe this was all due to sexual selection. Maybe this is something that tells our partners that we're strong, we're healthy, and we're going to produce a lot of really healthy babies. So maybe this was basically a kind of an ornament, similar to the lion's mane, that evolved because this is a sign of genetic fitness and high testosterone. Something that was selected for in humans, but something that in a lot of other chimps was just not seen as attractive. But that's not the conclusion from this recent study. And so in this recent study by the biological anthropologists from the University of Buffalo, researchers provide a much more unusual, but also a much more mundane answer. The human chin might actually do absolutely nothing. And so here they introduce the fourth explanation, referred to as a spandrel. In this case, a spandrel is something that comes from architecture. Basically a kind of a triangular space underneath some kind of an arch or a staircase that's not actually designed to be there for a purpose, but is really just a byproduct of a building and its design. And so in this case, a spandrel is not really designed to be there, but does appear if you start building certain structures. And so in this case, researchers propose that our chins seem to have formed in a somewhat similar way. Or basically that our chins are evolutionary accidents. As humans evolved, and as our faces began to shrink and pull back, at least compared to our cousins and compared to all of the other chimps, first our teeth became smaller, but then the top part of our jaw receded to match our smaller teeth, and the bottom part, the basal region, unfortunately did not shrink as much and at the same rate, which essentially left an unusual structure sticking out. It basically created our chin. Now it's not entirely clear why all of this happened, but quite a few propositions have been made in the past suggesting that maybe this was the result of the change in our diet, mostly because we started eating much softer foods as we learn how to cook and as we learn to produce all sorts of different food. And because the soft food does not require massive chewing muscles, with time our faces basically kind of shrunk. And so, as a byproduct of this shrinking, one of the bones was left sticking out and became our chin, which means that the chin is just a kind of a morphological byproduct. And it seems to have emerged not because it was selected for, but completely by accident as our skulls reorganized. And once again, this seems to be unique to humans, implying that the change in diet early on seems to have created features in us that are uniquely human. Or basically, our early diet and the change in diet defined us as a species. But in this case, this is not just a hypothesis, this was a research analyzing 532 adult specimens across 15 hominid species. Here this included humans, chimps, gorillas, and orangutans. And the focus was on comparing different features by measuring different proportions and by using certain landmarks on the skull to capture the detailed shape and size. And on top of this, the study also differentiates between different types of evolution, accounting for the genetic drift, direct selection, and indirect selection. And so then, by examining 46 specific measurements, they found that out of 9 specific chin traits, 6 of them showed no evidence for direct selection and seemed to have evolved completely by accident, with the formation of the chin also statistically being linked to the overall size reduction in the human face compared to our cousins. And so this was both a statistical and a morphological analysis based on a lot of different evidence. But as I mentioned, our chin is not the only thing that makes us human, and not the only thing that separates us from our cousins. And so if we do look at our bodies as a collection of specialized tools, there are several other features that are entirely human, or at least significantly different from other apes. For example, our eyes. And so if you look at a chimp, which is of course our closest cousin right now, you'll notice their eyes are mostly dark. Humans, however, are the only primates with highly visible white sclera, or that white stuff inside our eyes, which is currently absent in all of the other primates. And here biologists call this cooperative eye hypothesis. Or basically here it's explained as a kind of a social feature. Because the sclera in our eyes is white, it's incredibly easy for other humans to see exactly where we're looking. And so it acts as a kind of a silent social organ, allowing us to communicate and to cooperate just by moving our eyes without producing any sounds. Okay, once again, this is just a hypothesis, so we don't actually know exactly why our eyes are white, but that's one of the human features. Then we have something known as the eccrine sweat glands. While most primates have their sweat glands on their palms or the soles of their feet, which actually helps them to grip things better, humans seem to have a very unique density of sweat glands over nearly the entire human body, which essentially makes our entire skin a kind of a massive cooling organ compared to every other primate. And today anthropologists believe that this might have helped humans become exceptionally successful at hunting, and specifically persistent hunting, involving running long distances in very hot conditions. And so this was an evolutionary advantage to prevent overheating in conditions where other animals just cannot survive. Moreover, without this specialized cooling, our large brains would not be able to survive and would most likely cook during this heavy activity. And so, yeah, being sweaty is also being human. And somewhat relevant to this, we also have the median arch, or basically the foot arch that only humans seem to possess. And though it just looks like a shape, it does function like a mechanical organ. This is known as the medial longitudinal arch. And so for pretty much most apes, this is usually very different. Their feet are usually flat or allow them to curve in such a way that they can basically use their feet to wrap around trees. But the human arch is rigid and spring-like and actually stores and releases energy, which of course allows for bipedalism, allowing us to walk and run for extremely long distances without expending too much energy. And so this and the sweating basically made us perfect hunters. No other primate out there possesses any of these features. But naturally, we also have slightly different brains. Or specifically, our brains possess certain mini-organs and specialized neural structures meant for specific types of reasoning or for communication. For example, the Broca's and Wernicke's areas are known to be specialized for complex syntax and language. And though our cousins do have somewhat similar areas, they're not nearly as large and as complex, and do not allow them to communicate in the same way. And well, that's just some of the more common body parts that seem to be uniquely human. Okay, actually I'm forgetting maybe 2 more. Breasts and penis. Apparently most primates seem to have bony penis, whereas humans don't. And apparently most primates lose their breasts following puberty. Humans don't. Which suggests that we're also slightly different in terms of reproduction. But the point here is that understanding these differences is not just some kind of a fun trivia. It is a kind of a physical definition for what makes Homo sapiens Homo sapiens, or for basically what makes us human. And so, for example, when archaeologists discover a jawbone, the presence or absence of a chin can pretty much right away tell them if they're looking at a human or someone entirely different like a Neanderthal. And more importantly, this also reminds us that evolution is not always about perfection or actually making things more effective and better, and sometimes we end up with things that are just some kind of a byproduct. Something that's entirely random, and something that might not even have functions, and appears completely accidentally for somewhat unexpected reasons. And though we do have certain evolutionary advantages, such as our feet, and of course the ability to sweat from the entire body, we also have certain spandrels, like our chins, that just happen to come along for the ride. And so yeah, I guess next time you look in the mirror, remember that this right here is your human badge of honor. But it's also not a feature that's particularly important, and is a feature that seems to have appeared because we changed our diet over time. But anyway, we'll definitely come back and discuss some other discoveries in terms of evolution and what makes us human in some of the future videos as well. But until then, thank you for watching, subscribe, come back tomorrow to learn something else, support this channel on Patreon where you can find additional videos without any ads and can DM me directly, or by joining the channel membership that grants you early access. You can also support this channel by buying the Wonderful Person t-shirt in the description below. Stay wonderful, I'll see you tomorrow, and as always, bye bye.